Hello, I'm Anthony. The search for the perfect mystical unicorn guitar tone continues, and it's going pretty well, I have to say. I've been playing with a DI sound for the past few months, which last year I would have called heresy, but just on a whim one day I decided not to turn the Fender amp on and just try some DI setup. What I'm going to play you now is my current entirely DI based sound, and I think it sounds pretty good. Got a solo line here which I'm going to use as the kind of the sandbox to show you all of the various stuff that's going on at the moment, but the tone is really pretty good. Here we go. It wouldn't be right me making a video about guitar tone without slapping a load of caveats everywhere. This is actually a jam comp, so the tone itself is a little bit raw, but as we deconstruct it, you'll basically hear that fundamentally there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just that it was a very unrehearsed, literally spontaneous thing out of which I've built a solo. Okay, without further ado, let's start pulling it to bits and figure out where that sound's come from. Well, we've got four primary players in the chain: Bias FX, Amplitube, and then I've got an Echo Boy delay and an Arturia reverb. Let's turn them all off. This is what the raw guitar's tone sounds like all on its own. Pretty ropey playing, just ignore that. So what you're hearing there is an Ibanez JS1000 on the neck pickup, direct into the audio interface, no effects whatsoever. So this is the completely native dry sound straight out of the guitar, and obviously, you know, it's very plain and unadorned. I used the Bias FX to approximate the sound of my Fender amp. So this thing's only job is to make it sound as if the Fender amp is turned on. That's it. That's its only purpose in life. Now, I've done a couple of videos on that where I basically A-B'd between them and got that sound as close as I possibly could. I've done a little bit of tweaking since then, primarily to make it a little bit brighter, I think. It's been a while now. But let's bring that in. I tried very hard to do everything in Amplitube and it just couldn't pull it. This blackface plugin on the Bias FX system is just doing a better job of equating my Fender amp. So it's now going to get much brighter. You can hear all of that treble. I won't apologise for the playing again, I'm trying hard not to. So you can see simple blackface Fender emulation into the Greenback speaker system and a couple of microphones. The microphones are surprisingly significant. If you're playing around with plugins like this, don't forget to mess around with the microphones. Bias FX has 4 to choose from, and I'm constantly toggling between the SM57 and the 421 on one side of the fence, but I typically have this ribbon mic, the R121 ribbon, on the other channel. So these are mixing together to make a signal that's going into Amplitube, so it really is kind of making a composite sound, but nevertheless all of this stuff is significant and it all helps to generate a very nice simple flat tone that's then going to go on to have effects placed on top of it. So let's go over to Amplitube and see what it's doing. Couple of overdrive sounds, let's take them away. And we've also got a Univibe on the effects loop. I'll take that out. So this is the clean amp sound. And this Fender Champ is an absolute champ, pun fully intended. It's basically just adding a ton of saturation, a ton of dirt to the sound. I really like amplifiers with no controls. It just makes it more difficult for me to make a mess of it. And this Fender Champ is just great right out of the box. Simple volume knob, nothing else to mess with. As you can see, we're going into a split cabinet setup. This is probably unnecessary, to be absolutely honest with you. I could take a mono feed out of this and deal with all of the stereo outside of the unit. But it's just one of those things that I prefer the sound with it than without. Well, let's A/B them. I'll get it going again. So there's the stereo sound. Bit tricky because it's panned fully hard left. But even if it wasn't, it's just a thinner, flatter sound. Just for the sake of argument. Just adding a little bit of extra thickness and depth. And I'm constantly vacillating as to whether or not to have a dual speaker setup. I think in videos on this channel in the past I've said, what's the point? You know, just go into a single speaker cabinet and sort it all out later. My current opinion is otherwise, but you know, what can I say? I'm fickle. So here are the two cabinets. You can see panned hard left and hard right. So I've got this basically genuine stereo feed coming out of Amplitube, generated largely by the speakers, and this is where the stereo from the Bias FX is kind of rendered a little bit redundant. It's adding a little bit of extra harmonic content. Those two, the stereo pair that Bias FX has in it, are being merged back together again into what's effectively a mono signal going through the Fender amp. But you know, it does add quality that I'm quite happy to leave there. Now, when we start talking about these overdrive units that I'm going to turn on shortly, we need to start paying attention to Insight, because they're adding a ton of gain, entirely deliberate. They're driving the amplifier, causing the tubes, you know, everything is digital obviously, but the emulated tubes to overdrive. That's what's giving the crunch. So these overdrives are working hard. If I get it going, so we're still clean at the moment, and the signal is, as you can see, relatively flat. These two Insights are on either side of Amplitube. So this is the output from Bias FX, and this is the output from Amplitube, and they're pretty equivalent. The chicken picking thing is quite quiet. So it's what, 6-7 dB, so it's basically doubled in volume. That's the benefit of really driving the valve amp hard. I used to think that it was important to keep the signal flat all the way along the chain. That's really not true. As long as you're never actually exceeding 0 dB digital, you know, as long as you're not introducing digital distortion, it's perfectly okay to drive the signal hard. If you're ever worried about that, you've got that little trick of throwing an EQ onto the system. This EQ PG has a little meter on it, and you can check the signal in there. As long as it's not red, it means the signal at no part in the signal chain is actually going red. You know, digital clipping, you don't want that. And it's also worth noting the value of two overdrives together. Overdrives and distortions stack beautifully. There's a raging debate as to whether or not you're supposed to have distortion first or overdrive first. I'm just not going to get into it. You can see how I've got my two pedals set up. The drive on the overdrive is turned down quite low. In fact, the drive on both pedals is turned down quite low. They're not designed to be a full-on distortion sound. They're overdriving. Let's just put that back in the context of the music that's behind it. You can hear how it's cutting through the sound. That brashness that's coming from the Rat is helping it cut. Probably the most important effect in the entire chain is the Echo Boy. This thing is an absolute wonder. I have many fancy effects delay pedals spread across all of these various plugin collections, and I keep coming back to the Echo Boy. It's just an absolute dream. Just as a matter of interest, the only difference between Echo Boy and Echo Boy Junior, for the most part, is the interface. Just pick the one that you feel works the best, but I'm constantly toggling backwards and forwards between the two of them. They're both fabulous. So you can see I've got it set in Echoplex mode here, and this just turns it into an entirely different beast. Now, to be absolutely honest with you, you don't really need the reverb on top. It's quite subtle. Start solo and listen to the difference that the reverb brings in. It's not much. And that's because the delay is doing so much heavy lifting. When you've got delay and reverb working both together, for the most part, obviously depending on what levels you've got set, the delay does the heavy lifting. And the reverb is really just thickening and fattening the sound out. And it's just doing enough, in my opinion, for it to warrant its place there. Just a quick note on the backing guitar for all of these things. They all have basically the same setup. They don't have the same distortion sounds. They've all got different distortion sounds. But predominantly, it's a dirty, delay-heavy sound that I'm loving playing with at the moment. You can hear that delay bouncing. So even when it's clean, it's just absolutely creamy. On this one, we've got this weird Amplitube centric device. I don't think this is a thing. I think this is an IK multimedia plugin, but it's absolutely fabulous. The Diode Overdrive. It's just gritty and dirty and nasty, but it's got this kind of intrinsic warmth to it that I absolutely love. So that's where the nastiness is coming from in this sound. Heartily recommend if you've got Amplitube. Don't ignore this very unassuming, difficult to read the controls, kind of a wonder. And I think this has got it on as well. Oh, I've got two here. So you can see me constantly messing around with these three pedals, the Diode, the Pro Drive and the Boss, or the three overdrives that I tend to play with most often, and any combination of the two is great. So that's where we stand with the guitar sound at the moment. Really, really pleased. It's just so convenient to have direct into the audio interface. It's just one less thing to have to worry about. The fewer impediments in the way if you're playing the guitar, the better. And so I'm trying to get to this stage where nothing's locked in stone. As you can see, I'm not using the same sound every time I create a new guitar track, but I'm trying to hone down the number of options I've got so I don't end up just wallowing in indecision all of the time and never actually playing the damn thing. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks a lot.